Hey there! Welcome to Pallet University. Today we're taking a look at how Pokemon would be as pets. Specifically, one Pokemon. Pokemon who's one of my favorites and who was one of my first ever starter Pokemon, Totodile. Totodile is such a cute Pokemon that so many people love, probably because of its prominence in the Johto seasons of the anime. However, Totodile doesn't stay so cute and lovable for its entire life. For this series, we're going to be assuming that Pokemon evolve throughout their life as they get older, even if you don't train them against other Pokemon. So while you might start out with this cute little energetic guy, you'll end up with a giant, angry, potentially really dangerous Pokemon, Feraligatr. So we'll be sort of scoring and grading the evolutionary line as a whole. And we'll be using the same scoring system that the reptile YouTuber Clint's Reptiles uses in his video. So if you want more, information about how to do that, please, or how all of this works, please go check out Clint's channel. It would mean a lot to me because I love his channel so much. Anyway, with that, let's get to the actual content. So we'll be giving the Totodile line a score of 2.3 out of 5, and that comes down to our 5 criteria, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. For handling, I give the Totodile line a score of 2 out of 5. As a Totodile, you can play with it pretty much all day long. Ash's Totodile, which is the most frequently seen Totodile in the entire anime, is frequently seen as very playful, dancing around a lot. Occasionally it'll bite onto Ash or something, but it's mostly as a comic relief thing. Even though the Pokédex does say several times that its jaws are very strong, those same Pokédex entries also mention that it has a habit of biting anything that moves, which is not a habit that you want a pet, particularly a pet with very notably strong jaws, to have. And this is just in its weakest form. As the bigger, stronger Croconaw, the Pokédex says that it also has a habit of biting things, but this time it does not let go until its teeth either fall out or break. By the time that it finally gets to the fully grown Feraligatr, it's big enough to be handling you. Some of the most dangerous pets are the ones that lull you into a false sense of security. Many venomous snakes are actually very chill and very relaxed. Most of the time. However, that makes you get complacent, and that makes you think, that you don't need to take the usual precautions that you do to avoid getting bitten. And, 99 times out of 100 you can handle your venomous snake, without a problem. But that one time that you don't, that one time that there is a problem, it's a very serious problem, and you're either going to be dead or out a lot of money. Feraligatr's Pokédex entry from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum says it usually moves slowly, but it goes at a blinding speed to attack and bite prey. And this is exactly what you do not want in a pet. A Feraligatr could almost certainly kill a person, but you'd most likely just end up losing a limb. All things considered, not that bad. But the only reason that the Totodile line even gets a 2 out of 5 is because Totodile is pretty handleable by itself. And crocodilians in general are also rather smart, despite how they look. They can actually be trained, and if you work with them from the time that they're very young, they can actually become, pretty reasonable. You can even train them to associate a certain object with food. So when they see that object, they're like, okay, now it's food time. And if you come up to their enclosure, or their room/living room in your house, which we'll talk about later, if you don't show them that object, they'll be, okay, it is not food time. So they can associate with that, but that takes a lot of work to do. For care, the Totodile line receives a score of 1 out of 5. For good reason. There are not many species of crocodilians that are commonly kept as pets, but the one that is most common is called Cuvier's dwarf caiman, which is slightly smaller than Feraligatr. Feraligatr is almost exactly the size of the Cuban crocodile, which is very fortunately not kept as a pet very often because apparently they're quite cranky and also extremely endangered, so it's a good thing that they are not kept as pets. So since Cuvier's dwarf caiman is the most commonly kept species of crocodilian, we'll basically be basing the Totodile line's care off of this, but just sort of scaled up a little bit to fit the increase in size. Long story short, I hope that you have a spare room in your house, or a spare living room that you are not using, because that's probably what you'll need. And I also hope that that room has reinforced walls and is waterproof, because you'll also need that. Cuvier's dwarf caimans need roughly a land area in their enclosure of 6 feet by 8 feet, and then a water area, basically a pond, of 8 feet by 3 feet and around 3 feet deep. Being that for alligator is a little bit bigger, we'll sort of scale that up to the land area of 8 feet by 10 feet and the water area of 10 feet by 12 feet. That is 200 square feet, and the average bedroom in a house, not so much a small apartment like you see here, but the average square footage of a bedroom in a house is 220 feet. So basically a room in your house. Although that number given for the Cuvier's dwarf caiman is like the absolute minimum, which you really shouldn't be happy with. Like if you're getting a pet, you shouldn't be happy with the bare minimum care requirements for it. You should want to go over the top and give that animal the best life that you can. So you'd probably want to be giving a fur alligator multiple rooms in your house. It really wouldn't be all that unreasonable if this entire area was just land. But the water makes things pretty tricky. Crocodilians are infamously messy in their water areas. You know, that's typically where they go to the bathroom. So you would either need to, change out all of that water every day, which I would not recommend because that's roughly 2,500 gallons of water. Or you would need some kind of really, really good filtration system. You'd probably also need some kind of water heating system to keep the water warmer than just the average air temperature. Maintaining that large of a water feature is really, really unreasonable. And it's even more unreasonable when the thing that's living in it probably will try to rip your leg off if you do not train it properly. Aside from all the water stuff, there's also needs to be a land-based heating system set up, and it's gonna have to be a lot more than just that single light bulb that you see on the iguana in the pet store. Being ectothermic or cold-blooded for alligator would probably need to be warmed up by some kind of lighting system. Not just one heat lamp either, because that basically makes them try to heat up their entire body from just one spot, which can lead to burns. You would need a lot of bulbs spread out over a good-sized area. On top of the heating light bulbs, you would also need light bulbs that emit UVB light, which is the kind that animals would normally get from the sun when they're outside. Basically, without that, they can't incorporate calcium from their food into their bones, and their bones become very weak, or sometimes just don't grow properly, and they become deformed. Lastly, there's food, which is kind of weird in the world of Pokemon because, in the Pokedex, it very clearly says that these animals eat prey. Whatever that is, it is probably assumed that it is other Pokemon. But in the anime, whoever is traveling with the group, whether it's like Brock or Silent or whoever's making the food that season, has these little pellets that they feed the Pokemon, and somehow those are just good enough for them. I would say those are probably mostly okay. I have no idea what they're made out of, but the world of Pokemon is a weird place with lots of weird technology, so they're probably okay, but I would definitely want to supplement it with like actual prey type food, not alive, but some kind of fresh meat food. I sort of compare it to how you can technically feed like a dog cat food for its entire life, and it could be fine. It just would not be like as healthy as it could be if it were eating its natural diet. The only reason that the Totodile line gets even a 1 out of 5 for care is because even though they do have a relatively fast metabolism for reptiles, it's not like keeping a dog where it's like if you could, leave for a couple days without feeding it, it would be fine. If you left for a couple days without feeding your dog would notice. And you might not even have a dog when you get back. So that's the only reason they get a 1 out of 5. Next up, we have hardiness, for which the Totodile line gets a score of 5 out of 5. Assuming you feed it, good quality food, you have, all those lights set up, and you have, a good water filtration system and everything. Crocodilians are very robust animals. They're generally like really hardy and can live upwards of several decades. There is one caveat with this that I'll get more into in the next point, but depending on how and where you actually get your Totodile / Croconaw / for alligator, this score could be a little flexible and might be lower. For availability, the Totodile line gets one of two scores. It gets either 1 out of 5 or 4 out of 5. I really wasn't sure how to go about scoring this section because of just how little we actually know about the Pokemon world. So make sure to let me know your thoughts on this section and also the next section down in the comments, because I'd really like some feedback on this for the next video in this series. There are many parts of the Pokemon world that Game Freak has just not given us enough information about, and one of these things in my mind is how people get their Pokemon. The obvious answer is that people just go out and catch them. However, that's thinking in a very trainer-centric way. You know, where do non-trainers get their Pokemon? For example, like, where do farmers get their Miltank? Are there Pokemon shops that you can go and buy pet Pokemon in? Are there Pokemon livestock sales that you can go buy Pokemon livestock at? These are just things that we have no idea about. In the real world, you can buy most pets directly from the breeder who produced that animal. And being that there is a trainer class called breeders in Pokemon, I would assume that this is probably a thing as well. If that is the case, Totodile would be sort of hard to find from the breeder just because, you know, they're like all the other starter Pokemon, they're relatively rare in the wild, which means that not that many people would be breeding them in captivity for pets. But I'm sure that you'd be able to find one if you were dedicated enough, and I'm sure that there is something analogous to the internet in the Pokemon world. So I'm sure you could find one if you were dedicated enough, which is why this line potentially gets the 4 out of 5. If not, though, that's where the 1 out of 5 comes from, because then you would have to go find this Pokemon yourself, which, as I mentioned, might be pretty hard. And in fact, there's actually only one region where you can catch Totodile in the wild, and it's not the one you're thinking of. Even though these Pokemon are technically Generation 2, the only region that you can find wild Totodile in is actually Alola, in which you can find them in Sun and Moon using the island scan. They can be found in the wild in Johto in the anime, but as I feel most people agree, that anime is not a great legitimate source for everything, but for, you know, devil's advocate, we will assume that you can find them in the wild if you live in Johto as well. So if you live in either of those two regions, great. It also gets a 4 out of 4 because you can just go to wherever they live. The regions aren't that big, and you can just go catch one yourself, and then that's your new pet. However, if you live in the other 6 regions, you're kind of out of luck. As I mentioned in the previous category, that we do have a little bit of a caveat with this, in that I've not seen anything about this in Pokemon games, or the anime, or anything. But if you've ever worked with wild animals, you'll know wild animals are not healthy. If you find an animal from the wild, I can guarantee you that there is some form of parasite on it or in it. The only parasite-like Pokemon that I am aware of is Joltik, which wouldn't really be that big of a problem for the Totodile line. However, because of the extremely important role that parasites play both in the ecosystems in which they live, and also the evolution of many different species around the world, I would have to believe that there's some form of parasitism in the Pokemon world as well. So if you were to get your Totodile from the wild, that is something that you would have to get taken to the Pokemon Center, get checked out. Fortunately, the Pokemon Center is free. Wouldn't that be nice? So that's not as big of an issue, but that could potentially lead to your Totodile living less long in captivity. And for the last category, we have upfront costs. As challenging as the last category was to score, this one was even harder. The Totodile line gets a score of 1 out of 5 for upfront costs. First, I will start with the easier cost to figure out. Unless you have a spare bedroom in your house that you don't need, that is also waterproof and reinforced, you're going to be shelling out a lot of money. Even if you do have those things, you'll still need those roughly 2,500 gallons of water. You will also need a couple hundred cubic feet of soil to use as the land area. You'll also need that heating area, those lights, which are very expensive and need to be replaced somewhat often. You also need that water heating and filtration system, which is also quite expensive for one that size. Realistically, you'd probably need a second job to afford all of these things for your alligator. Now for the part that is harder to score. How much would the Pokemon itself cost? If you live in one of those 2 regions where you can go catch it yourself, relatively cheaply. Assuming that you don't have any Pokemon to battle with, so the Totodile would be at full health. Also, the Totodile that you can catch on Island Scanner level 12, so we'll just, for simplicity's sake, we will assume that the Totodile that you catch in Johto is also level 12. So on average, to catch a level 12 full health Totodile, it would cost you roughly $48 in real US American money, because I did that conversion, if you were using Ultra Balls. I didn't calculate if you were to use Pokeballs, Great Balls, or like something like a Lure Ball like they use in the anime, just because I just don't think that they would be efficient. The Lure Ball probably would be, but it's like unless you live in the Johto region where you can go to Kurt first, that's actually relatively easy if you live in Johto, but for Alola, not that much. Plus $48 US dollars isn't all that expensive for an animal that will live potentially decades for you. However, like I said, that's only if you live in those regions. What if you don't? What if the breeding system is not a thing? You would need to travel to those regions. So like this would technically, I guess, sort of incorporate the cost of the plane ticket or boat ticket or whatever to Alola or Johto. And who knows how much that would be. See how this gets kind of complicated? And also, like, who knows how much it would be to get from a breeder? You know, assumingly the breeder could also get them from the wild for roughly $48 a pop. But as we've seen, the housing cost is extremely expensive. And if you're breeding animals, you also need to pay to house them. So it would definitely cost significantly more to get them from a breeder than just those 48 US dollars. Regardless though, actually acquiring the Pokemon would be the cheapest part of having this Pokemon as a pet. And that is why the Totodile line gets a overall score of 2.3 out of 5. These Pokemon probably could make really great pets, assuming that you're rich and that you don't have a really strong emotional attachment to your limbs. This was a really different type of video for me. It was also my longest scripted video to date, so hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I do. Reptile keeping is something that I really enjoy and something that I plan on doing a lot more of later in my life once I get like my own house and everything. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Please let me know your genuine feedback on this type of video down in the comments below. It would really mean a lot. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science. As well as if you feel like this content is worthy of it, we do have a Patreon, the link to which will be down in the description as well. Also, massive shout out to our first patron, Patty Murphy. Thank you for your support, it really means a lot. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.